All right, everybody, welcome to the stream. My name's Ryan, and this is As It Is Written, and I'm excited to be here this evening. We are going to go over we're going to watch a video by R.C. Sproul. What is evil and where did it come from? So this is going to be a very interesting hour-long video, and I'm excited to just jump right on into it. So we'll get started right now without any further delay.
Well, it's not fair. I don't dream up the themes for our conferences each year. The staff does that, and then they come to me and give assignments as to what I'm supposed to address. And you notice on the board a moment ago that I have been given 2 questions to address, each of which would be worthy of a lengthy series to consider, and I'm supposed to answer these questions in one message. Well, that's impossible. I won't do it because I can't do it. But we'll give you a little introduction to these questions. And the first of the questions is, what is evil? The second question is, where did it come from? But the first part of the question is, what is evil? And my immediate response to that in presidential fashion is to say, it depends upon what the meaning of is. Now, that's really not a joke. I'm serious about that because there are different ways in which we use the verb is as a verb to be. And when we're dealing with the question of what is evil, we face immediately the issue of whether evil really is at all. Now, that might seem strange to you, but my first assertion this morning is that evil isn't. That is, it is not. Why? Because evil is nothing. Am I going too fast? Evil is nothing. Now, lest you think that I've fallen into Christian Science, a religion that's neither Christian nor science, where the reality of evil is denied altogether and considered to be an illusion, I want to clarify what I mean when I say evil is not, or that evil is nothing. Before I do that, let me tell you a story of an occasion where I was asked to debate a spokesperson for Christian Science on this question of the nature of evil. And the position of my opponent that day was that evil is an illusion. And so in the course of that discussion, I asked him a question. Did he think that I was an illusion? Was I a fig Newton of his imagination? And he declared that he did not think that I was an illusion. He considered that I was real. And I said, well, we're really having this discussion here, and I am saying that evil is not an illusion, and you are saying that it is an illusion. And my simple question is this: do you think it's good that I am saying that evil is not an illusion? He said no. I said, well, if it's not good that I'm saying that, it must be bad. And so here's one example of an evil that is not an illusion. And it sort of went downhill after that. But what do I mean when I say that evil is nothing? What I mean by that is I'm taking the word nothing and resting upon its etymological derivation, where the term nothing comes from the combination of a negative prefix and a subject. And the word nothing really means no thing. And the reason I want to stress that point is that in the culture, we get the idea that evil is some kind of independent substance, something that is in your drinking water or in the clouds somewhere, some force or power that is independent, that exists in and of himself and influences the affairs of your life and of this world. And so the first thing we have to say about what evil is what it is not. It is not a thing that has existence. Evil has no being. It has no ontological status. Rather, evil is an action of something that is a thing. I am something, you are something, and when I do something that is not good, then I am doing something that is evil. But evil then is an activity of some being. It has no being itself. Now that may seem like a pedantic point and of no immediate concern to the second question of where evil comes from, but later on, God willing, I'll try to indicate why our definition of evil is so important to the deeper question of where it comes from. Now, back to the idea of its nothingness. Historically, the two great theologian philosophers in the history of the church who have addressed the question of what is evil were, of course, Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine before him. And both Augustine and Aquinas used two Latin words, of course, because you can't do theology without using Latin words. And that they used two Latin words to describe the nature of evil. And those two words were negatio and privatio. And you can guess the translation of those two Latin words. Privatio comes into the English language with the word privation, and negatio comes into the English language with the word negation. And so historically and classically, the nature of evil has been defined in terms of negation and privation. In philosophy and in theology, one of the most important ways in which we try to give definitions to things that are mysterious is by using the method called the way of negation. And that method talks in terms of what something is not. For example, when we talk about the character and the being of God, we say that God is infinite. What does that mean? Well, that means he is not finite. That's an application of this way of negation. And so what Augustine and Aquinas were getting at is that to discuss the nature of evil, which the Bible calls the mystery of iniquity, we have to first understand it by way of negation, by what it is not. Now, evil in this sense can only be defined against the backdrop of what is good. And in biblical terms, evil is defined by words like this: ungodliness, unrighteousness, injustice, for example, so that the term is used as the negation, the opposite of the positive thing that's being affirmed. So that injustice or unjustness, it can only be understood against the previous concept of justice. Unrighteousness can only be recognized as unrighteousness against the background of righteousness as the standard by which unrighteousness can be recognized and can be defined. I think that's pretty easy to see, that the way in which negative language is used to describe evil. In this sense, the great theologians would indicate that evil is parasitic. It's like a parasite. It can't be known in and of itself as some independent being, but can only be known and understood against the positive standard. And like a parasite, if the host dies, the parasite dies with it, because the parasite depends upon the host for its own strength and existence. And in like manner, and in an analogical way, the same thing is true of evil, as that you can't really describe it, you can't really define it, except against the background of the good. Now, the other word that is used by Augustine and Aquinas is the word privation. And what a privation is some sort of lack or some sort of deficiency. If you don't get something that you want, that doesn't mean that you're experiencing deprivation, but if you don't get something that you need, then it can be properly said that you have been deprived, that you are lacking something that is necessary and essential to your very being. If we go to the Westminster Confession of Faith, the 17th century Reformed confession, and its catechetical formulations in the Westminster Larger Catechism, and then in the Shorter Catechism, you have the simple question that is asked: what is sin? What is sin? And since you all know the catechism, you know the answer to that before I give it. What is sin? Sin is any want of conformity to or transgression of the law of God. So there, confessionally, sin or moral evil is defined in terms of a lack, of a privation, of a want of conformity to. Righteousness involves conforming to the law of God, doing what God commands. But sin enters in when we fail to do what God commands, and we fail to conform to his standards of what is righteous. And so on the one hand, the Catechism says that sin is a one of conformity to, which is a kind of privatio, a kind of privation, or transgression of the law of God. Now, we're moving out of simple privation and simple negation to another element, an element that the reformers of the 16th century added to the classic definition of evil. They agreed that evil is negation and is privation, but lest anyone should think that because evil has no being, no independent status, is not a thing, unless because of that we come to the conclusion that evil really is an illusion. The reformers said that yes, sin is negation, or evil is negation, evil is privation, but they added another Latin term, don't they always? Huh? They added the term accusa. That is to say, evil is privatio accuosa, meaning that though evil is not something that exists in and of itself, it is real, and its effects and its impact are devastating. There is an actual privation, that is, an activated privation, an activated disobedience to the Word of God. And because real beings act out real evil, though evil is not independent, nevertheless, it is real. Am I making sense? Are you getting that? You understanding that point? Is it too obscure? Of course not. You all get it, don't you? So that's where we start with this question of what is evil and where does it come from? That's the easy part of the two questions. The second part of the question has to do with the origin of evil and how evil could intrude into a universe created by a God who is altogether holy, altogether righteous. And not only is this universe created by such a God, it is also governed and ruled by such a God. And if this God is holy, and if he is righteous, how in the world can he tolerate so much evil in it? The origin of evil has been called the Achilles heel of Christianity. And that analysis, or that analogy, goes back to the Iliad and to the Battle of Troy, where Achilles could only be wounded in one place, and that was at the back of his heel, which was the only part of his body that was not protected by his armor. And so when we say that something is the Achilles heel, we mean that it is the supreme point of vulnerability. And critics of Christianity have said where the Christian truth claim is most vulnerable is at this point of the presence of evil in a world allegedly made and governed by a good and holy God. Now, sometimes, as Christians, we fail to feel the weight of that problem. The philosopher John Stuart Mill put it this way: the presence of evil makes the very existence of God problematic, because in the Christian view of God, we say that on the one hand, God is omnipotent. He possesses all power. On the other hand, we say that God is loving and good. And Mill looks at the pain and the sorrow and the suffering and the moral evil in this world, and he said, wait a minute, these two ideas, the goodness of God and the omnipotence of God, in light of the reality of evil, cannot logically cohere or coexist. His argument is this: if God is all-powerful and has the power to create a universe without evil, or has the power to rid the universe of evil in any given moment, if he has the power to do it, and he doesn't do it, then he's not good, or he's not loving. Because what kind of being who has omnipotent power could stand by and observe the pain, the suffering, and wickedness in a universe of his own creation and not eliminate it? He can't be good. If, on the other hand, God is good and God is loving and wants to get rid of evil that brings so much of a blemish to his creation, like the BP oil spill that everybody recognizes is a disaster, and God would see it as a disaster, and he would love to see it cleaned up, but he doesn't have the power to do it. So do you see, one way or the other, God's either not good or he's not all-powerful. Now, I think there's an adequate answer to that question, and it's one, God willing, I'll try to provide for you in the minutes that are left in this consideration. But before I go any further to answer the question of where evil came from, I have to give my short answer to the question, my down and dirty answer to the question, where did evil come from? And my answer is this: I don't know. So maybe it's time for me to just sit down and shut up. But what I want to do in the time remaining is to tell you why I don't know. 40 years ago, I was giving a lecture on this subject back in Pittsburgh, and in the audience was my mentor, Dr. John Gerstner, and he heard me say on that occasion these things. I said, I don't know how to explain the origin of evil. And what else I can tell you is that I'm sure that in this world, I will never be able to answer that question. I don't know of any philosopher or theologian who has answered it adequately, at least to satisfy my mind, and I'm sure I'm not going to go beyond the insights of Augustine, Aquinas, Calvin, Luther, Edwards, and the rest who have wrestled with this. When I was finished, my mentor took me aside, and he was somewhat pained and visibly irritated with me. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, what's the matter is your arrogance. I said, my arrogance? What did I do? He said, you told these people that you didn't know where evil came from and that you couldn't explain the problem, and that's fine. But you're only 30 years old, and do you assume that you have already reached the saturation point of all the knowledge that you will ever acquire in your lifetime? How do you know, R.C. Sproul, that you won't be able to solve this problem tomorrow? I said, because Aquinas couldn't do it, and Augustine couldn't do it, and Edwards couldn't do it, and you can't do it, and these guys are so much more intelligent than I am. I'm trying to tell you, I don't think there's much likelihood that I'm going to solve a conundrum that they were unable to resolve. Well, again, he rebuked me for my arrogance in assuming that I had already reached the pinnacle of my own knowledge, and that maybe someday I would be able to answer the question. Well, to defend the remarks that I made 40 years ago, I still don't know the answer to this question, and not for a lack of trying. What this question demands philosophically and theologically is an adequate theodicy. For how many of you is the word theodicy a new word, or a word that you would have difficulty defining? Thank you. Okay, we're going to learn a new word today. The word theodicy, Theodicy, is a word that comes from a combination of two very important biblical words. There is the word theos, which is the New Testament word for God. And then there is the word dikaios, which is the New Testament word for justice or righteousness, a form of which is the word dikaiosune, which is the New Testament word for justification. What a theodicy is an intellectual, reasoned defense of God for the problem of evil in the universe. So, in other words, it's an attempt to answer the critique of John Stuart Mill and others, and to justify God for this problem of evil. I don't know how many theodicies I've studied in my lifetime, quite a few of them. I have yet to find one completely satisfying to my own brain. In a few minutes, I will provide the theodicy which I think comes the closest to solving the problem that I've ever seen, but still lacks final resolution. Now, I don't want to exaggerate, but my estimate is, I don't think this is hyperbole, Vesta could confirm it, you could ask her, at least it seems to me that about once a month, maybe it's not quite that frequently, but it seems to me that about once a month I get a letter from somebody out there who has solved the problem of the origin of evil. And they want to run it by me. And I have to answer these letters as politely and nicely as I know how, when I want to say, this is amateur night, folks, and I don't think you feel the weight of the problem, because the answers that I find in these letters that are addressed to me, and I do appreciate that people struggle with this question and are trying to come up with answers, but it seems to me that the answers I hear again and again are not just simple, but they're simplistic. They don't really see the depth of the problem. And of course, the most common answer I receive is that the origin of evil has to be located in human free will. And of course, we all understand that the one who brings evil into the world, moral evil, is man, Adam and Eve, or before that, the devil, and both of those personages were exercising the faculty of choosing in which they have been endowed by their Creator, and that they have made choices, the result of which are evil. And so I said, well, see, what's the problem? We answer this problem with the free will of man. Sin came into being because Adam or Eve, or both of them, freely decided to disobey God. Just as Lucifer, when he was a good angel, was transformed into an evil, fallen angel when he exercised his free will by choosing to disobey God. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not denying that those choices were made, and I'm not denying that they were evil choices. What I'm saying is that they don't solve the problem, because we know this, that before a choice can be made, prior to the choices being made, there has to be some kind of moral inclination. And if you examine it as carefully, for example, as Jonathan Edwards did in his classic work on the freedom of the will, Edwards comes to the conclusion that the only way you can account for an evil choice is by having an evil inclination or disposition to that choice. It's manifest that Adam and Eve's choice was evil, and they chose it according to their will, and that's also true of Satan. But the question is, where did their prior disposition come from? What was it that inclined Adam and Eve to disobey God? Now, part of Roman Catholic theology is to struggle with this question and talk about the doctrine of concupiscence. You may have heard of concupiscence, and Rome defines concupiscence in this manner: that concupiscence is of sin and inclines to sin, but is not sin. Well, in one respect, I think that's right, that it is not an actual sin of disobedience in terms of the outward action, but that which is of sin and inclines to sin is sinful. And so a being who has a desire to do something evil, before he chooses to do that evil, is already fallen before he makes the choice. Do you see that? That's the point that so many people miss when they say, oh, well, it was all because of the free choice of Adam and Eve. But the question is, why did these creatures who were made in the image of God and who were made good choose to disobey him? Well, if you say for no reason, that there was no prior inclination, no prior desire or disposition, then you've described a choice that is not a moral action at all. You've denied the moral agency of the creature when you say he does it arbitrarily. Some people look at the text of Genesis chapter 3 and they will argue, well, they were coerced into sinning by the power of Satan. This is the old argument: the devil made me do it. This was the argument that Eve gave. It was her theodicy. Adam hitchhiked on that argument when he said to God, "The woman that you gave to me," as if God now had forced evil into Adam through the irresistible power of the wife that God provided for him. Yes, Lord, you made her as my helpmate, and she helped me right over the cliff here into the fall. See, so the idea there is that we explain it away by demonic coercion. But if evil entered the garden through demonic coercion, if it was real coercion, then it would be excusable. And it would not carry the moral judgment that it does carry according to Scripture. It would excuse Adam and Eve because they would have been powerless to resist the temptation of Satan. That not only does not solve the problem philosophically, but it also violates the text of Scripture. The other is that Satan is described as the most clever of all of the beasts of the field, and that he comes and seduces Eve by tricking her with his guileful arguments and basically fools her. And so Eve falls into sin out of ignorance. And again, we would say, if that were the case, if she really had been ignorant with what we call invincible ignorance, an ignorance that is impossible to overcome, if that were the case, then she would be guiltless, and God would be wicked in punishing her for that act. Not only that, but the appeal to the ignorance of Eve and or Adam also violates the text, because the text tells us that God spoke clearly to Adam and Eve and told them what they may not do and what the consequences would be if they did it. At which point Satan challenged the very premise of God when he says, did God say you may not eat of any of the trees in the garden? Now, he knew very well that that's not what God had said. But Eve said, no. Eve now becomes the world's first apologist. She defends the integrity of God. God didn't say that, Mr. Devil, Mr. Serpent. He said, of all the trees of the garden we may freely eat. But then he put this one area out of bounds. Said if that we ate of that, we would surely die. Now Satan says, you will not die. Now God created Adam and Eve unfallen. Their physical powers were greater than ours because our bodies have been ravaged by the consequences of sin. But not only that, their foolish minds were not darkened, had not been ruined by original sin, and their ability to think clearly far exceeds any Einstein or Aquinas or any other post-fallen person. If ever a human being would have instantly recognized a violation of the law of non-contradiction, it would have been Eve when the serpent said, you shall not die. Because she knew that her Creator, to whom she owed her very existence, had said, if you do A, B will necessarily follow. Instead, Satan comes and says, if you do A, non-B will follow. So that the serpent initially is subtle, but then he gets rid of the subtlety and makes a direct assault on the integrity and truthfulness of God. And Eve buys it. So she can't say, I didn't know the gun was loaded. She can't appeal to ignorance for her sin. And so the deception of Satan, of our human forefathers, did not excuse them because they were morally capable and culpable for recognizing the contradiction to the Word of God and not to obey the lie rather than the truth. So that explanation falls by its own weight. What are we left with? You know, the Swiss theologian Karl Barth called the problem of evil the unmögliche Möglichkeit, the impossible possibility, which is a contradictory statement. It's a nonsense statement. Well, in that case, Barth was not just merely practicing his favorite tool of dialectical thinking or the use of paradox to make a point. He understood that evil had to be possible or it couldn't have happened. But we cannot find any way in which it was possible. It seems, at least on the outside, that was impossible. And yet it happened, and that's why he calls it an impossible possibility. That's his way as a theologian to throw up his hands and say, I give up. I don't know. Dr. Gerstner would have said to Dr. Barth, you haven't died yet, Carl. Don't give up so easily, or you're surrendering to the same arrogance that this kid in Pittsburgh has suffered from. Well, one of the most fascinating theodicies ever produced on this question was produced by a German philosopher by the name of Leibniz. And Leibniz's famous theodicy goes something like this. He distinguishes, first of all, among three different kinds of evil. There is metaphysical evil, there's physical evil, and there's moral evil. Now, you all know what physical evil is. It's Katrina. It's the earthquake. It's disease that ravages you. We say that's a bad thing. The doctor gave us bad news today about our health. That's physical evil. But physical evil is not moral evil, though biblically there is a connection. What he means by metaphysical evil is metaphysical imperfection. The only perfect being that exists is God. He's perfect in all of his attributes. God is self-existent, eternal, immutable, omniscient, all the rest. And even God cannot create another God. You say, well, God can do anything. No. God can't be God and not be God at the same time, same relationship. God can't build a rock so big that he can't move it, nor can God create another God.
God also cannot be evil. He cannot be evil. He cannot do evil. There are a lot of things that God is incapable of doing. Anything that is logically inconsistent. So like you said, he can't make a rock too big for him to move. Those sorts of things. Those questions are very easy to answer, and the answer is no. That doesn't mean that God isn't all-powerful. You can be all-powerful of the set of things that are possible. So the way that God has ordered the world, he is incapable of committing evil. He's incapable of doing anything that is against his nature. He must be just. He must be merciful. And that is what caused him to create the situation where Jesus came down, became man, and died for us on the cross and saved us from the consequences of our sins. That's how he had to work it out so that unjust people could be saved and be in the presence of a just God.
Why not? because the second God would, by definition, be a creature. He would not be self-existent, he would not be eternal, but he would be eternally dependent upon the first God. And so anything that God creates must, by the nature of things, be less than he is. That's not big news. I mean, the Bible makes this absolute distinction between creator and creature. But he's saying that God could have created the world in many, many different ways, but no matter how he created the world would, by definition, have to be imperfect metaphysically, because it would fall short of the being of God himself. You follow that? And so Leibniz says that metaphysical evil gives rise to physical evil, and together bring to pass moral evil. It's a cleverly constructed argument, but in the final analysis makes God by necessity the author of evil, and also gives the ultimate excuse for our sin. What do you expect from me, God? To err is human. I'm finite, I'm not you, and since I am finite and conditioned and derived, I morally fall out of necessity. The argument that we sin because we're finite is one that not only Leibniz has given, Paul Tillich fell back on it, process philosophy uses it. You see it again and again in many different shapes and sizes and forms. And it's one of the most frequent answers that I get from these people that write me letters and tell me that the reason why sin came into the world is because we're finite, and if finite, we not only are prone to sin, but it is inevitable that we do sin. And I try to point out to them, if sin is a necessary consequence of being finite, it's excusable. How can God still find fault? It was Voltaire who wrote the little book Candide, in which he wrote a satire in response to Leibniz's theodicy. If you've ever read Candide, you know of this character who's seen as kind of a bum-fumbling guy by the name of Dr. Pangloss. And Dr. Pangloss is espousing the theory that this is the best of all possible worlds. You can't be mad at God. God did the best that he could do. This was written right after the Lisbon earthquake that caused so much pain and suffering in Portugal that in light of the fresh memory of this earthquake, what Voltaire was trying to do was to reduce the theodicy of Leibniz to ridicule. So I'm just saying this to say that I am not persuaded of that argument either. So what do I say about it? A couple of things, and what I'm about to say now might shock you and could easily be misunderstood by you. Before I say it, I want to also say that the Bible makes it clear that it is a sin to call good evil. And it is a sin to call evil good. And that's a sin that we commit every day when we try to justify our own disobedience and our own moral sinfulness. We try to turn it around and make our evil actually look good. Or when we despise the law of God and hate the law of God, which is good, we say there's something wrong with that law. I'm not going to obey it because it's not good for me. I'm calling good evil. So we're not allowed to call good evil or evil good. That's axiomatic. Now here's what I'm going to say. Evil is not good, but it is good that there is evil. Evil is not good, but it is good that there is evil. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. In a universe ruled by a perfect God. God has His purpose for the entrance of evil into this world. And in a certain sense, as Augustine said centuries ago, God even ordained that evil come into the world. If He did not ordain it, it wouldn't be here. Because evil has no power to overcome the sovereign, providential government of this universe. Now, the favorite verse that is annually voted by evangelical Christians as people's favorite verse in the Bible is Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love the Lord and who are called according to His purpose. Now, unless God has sovereign power over evil, He will not be able to keep that promise.
Yep.
That promise that we cling to, that promise we rely on, that promise that encourages us that no matter how many bad things we suffer in this world, it's not that God is saying that those bad things are good things, but He's saying that they are working for good. I'm using it ultimately for good. Unless God has the power over good and evil, He can't make that promise. Do you see that? And so for purposes I don't know and I don't understand, God, as Augustine qualified in a certain sense, ordained that evil come into this world. Not naively so that you may experience the difference between good and evil. My daddy used to say, you don't have to live in a garbage can to know that it stinks. But for a redemptive purpose. The classic example of that is the story of Joseph, when he was confronted by his brothers after they had so treacherously betrayed their brother, sold him into slavery and all the rest. And when they discover that they're now talking to the prime minister of Egypt and it's their long-lost brother, they're terrified that he's going to bring the wrath of Egypt down on their head. And Joseph says, I'm not God. He said, and I know what you did. You know what you did. And I know what you meant by it. I know what your intentionality was as moral creatures. You meant it for evil.
God meant it for good.
But God meant it for good.
Amen.
That's one of the hardest concepts. But if you want to understand it, look at Good Friday. Ultimately, who delivered Jesus up to the Gentiles to be killed? Ultimately, who was it who was pleased that he be punished? It pleased the Lord to bruise him. The blackest act in all of human history is celebrated now by what we call Good Friday. Because though the motives and the intents of all of the actors that were engaged in the trial and the execution of our Lord Jesus Christ, for which they are responsible, God didn't force them to do it, but His sovereign power trumped their mortal evil desires. because it was through the foreordination of God that Jesus was crucified. This wasn't an accident in history. And so that God has this ability to order a universe in which he uses evil for perfectly pure and holy purposes, which we will see in the full and final analysis only in glory. One last point before my time expires.
I would just like to add to that ultimately God allows evil so that he can be glorified. And what I mean by that is he could not be glorified properly if he wasn't glorified by beings that choose to glorify him. And in order for there to be a choice, you must be able to choose the wrong thing. So there's a right thing and a wrong thing, and you must be able to choose one or the other. Of course, there can be more than two choices in a matter, but just to make it simple, a choice requires an opposite from what is right. And so what God did by allowing evils is he allowed us to truly love him. You cannot truly love someone if you are forced to love them. It's not real love then. And so God doesn't force us to love him. If he didn't allow for sin, then it would be him forcing us to love him. And so God ultimately allowed us to make decisions contrary to what he willed in order for us to be able to truly and honestly love him. So that is partially, at least, why evil is allowed. The other part is, if God were to eradicate evil from the universe this instant, that could include you. You could be one of those things that is swept away as evil. If it weren't for the blood of Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made, I'd be swept away for the evil that I've done. And so you don't want God to enact his justice right this second unless you're saved. And I'm glad that he waited the thousands of years that he did after Jesus Christ's death and resurrection so that I could be born and live to glorify him, though I have messed up and screwed up.
And for this I'm indebted to Augustine. And I wanted to tie together what I said earlier about evils having no ontological status or existence, is that although we have a problem explaining the presence of evil, the unbeliever's problem is greatly exacerbated over ours. Again, the only way you can identify something as being evil is against the backdrop of the good. And only if good exists does evil become a problem. Let me say it again. Only if good exists does evil become a problem. And so in a convoluted way, indirectly, the presence of evil points to the reality of the good. It becomes an argument not against God, but for the existence of God. Mm-hmm. And the pagan has two problems. He not only has to account for the entrance of evil to the world, but he has to account for the existence of good without an author of goodness. He has to say, in the final analysis, as many pagans do today, there is no such thing as evil. There's no such thing as good, only personal preferences. That's what the relativist says until you steal his wallet. Then he suddenly abandons his relativism and says, that's not right. And he calls the cop looking for justice. So I've said all this to say, I don't know. But I want you to understand why I don't know, and why this question is such a thorny one, and why it is the mystery of iniquity. But I leave you with this thought. Though I don't know or fully understand the origin of evil, I do know the future of it. I do know that it has been overcome and that God will rid this universe of all moral evil, physical evil, and metaphysical evil.
Amen.
As we grow up into the fullness of Christ and inhabit in a new heaven and a new earth, and where there is no more crying, no more death, death shall be no more pain, and no more sin, which I will, God willing, speak about tomorrow.
Praise God. All right. What a wonderful message from R.C. Sproul. You can check out more from Ligener Ministries. I believe that they are linked in the description. Thank you for listening to that. We're going to move on, and we are going to watch one more quick video before we get to our Bible reading, and that's going to be Chuck Missler on signs in the heavens and the Hebrew Mazzaroth and the stars.
I think we are unique for lots of reasons. But we're talking about stars a little bit. I hope you can see this. This is a picture of a spiral galaxy. Light years are a measure of distance, not time. Mm-hmm. It's the distance that light travels at its present rate in a year. This galaxy is about 2 million light years away, apparently. Here's another one. You see these pictures in magazines and all the time. Here's a galaxy, spiral nebula, that's 18 million light years away. So it's about 9 times as far as the previous one I showed you. Here's one, in fact 2, but they're about, the big one, the main one here is 25 million light years away. These are big distances, especially at the speed of light. Set that aside. Here's one that's 32 million light years away. Here's one that's 65 million light years away. These are all spiral galaxies. There are lots of other nebula, but these are spiral nebula. And here's one that's 106 million light years away. Now, I don't know if you've noticed as I was flashing through these things.
Just a point for those of you who may not know, a galaxy is a group of stars that all orbit around a central point. So our galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy. If you go out into the woods, very far away from humanity, where there isn't as much light pollution, you can actually see the band of the Milky Way in the night sky. I've seen it a number of times when I was in Boy Scouts. It's beautiful. If you haven't seen the Milky Way before, I highly recommend that you make a trip out somewhere where you can see it. And so he is describing structures of hundreds of millions of stars, hundreds of billions of stars. The estimate for the number of stars in our Milky Way galaxy is about 100 to 200 billion stars. That's just a hugely astronomical number. And then on top of that, these stars are millions and tens of millions, even some of them hundreds of millions of light years away. And a light year is a unit of distance, like he said. It is the distance that light travels in 1 year. So we have light traveling at about 186,000 miles per second. So in 1 second, it travels 186,000 miles. That's about 10 times the radius of the Earth, or the diameter of the Earth, I'm not sure. So a huge number in 1 single second. And then on top, you multiply that by 60 seconds in a minute, by 60 minutes in an hour, by 24 hours in a day, by 365.25 days in a year. So a light year is a huge number. And so we're going to listen to Chuck Missler explain some things about signs in the heavens and the Hebrew Mazzaroth. I'm sure he will explain it, but essentially the Mazzaroth are the Hebrew names and the Hebrew stories behind the zodiac. And so the zodiac are the pagan corruptions of that beautiful system that God created called the Mazzaroth.
But here they all are at one time. And do you notice anything strange about these galaxies? One's only 2 million light years away, 118, 125, 130. I deliberately put them in distance order, okay? Do you notice that their arms are spread out almost the same? Well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, here's the point. The furthest galaxies had to release their light long before the closer galaxies, obviously, okay? Because light's not infinite, it's finite, it has a finite speed, whatever it is. The further galaxies did not have as much time to rotate and twist their arms. We should be seeing the further galaxies earlier in their cycle, right? Thus, the closer galaxies should have the most twist, but they don't. The furthest galaxies have just as much twist as the nearer one, which says they're all done at the same time. The speed of light, even if the speed of light was 1,000,000 times faster in the past, that would account for them being so similar. This is another one of the reasons that the speed of light issue starts to tie things together that would be otherwise be very mysterious. Some other insights. It's interesting that
So what Chuck Missler is referring to is the current scientific view is that light is in a steady state and it travels at the exact same speed always. And it has never changed and will never change and could never change. And it is what they call the universal speed limit, 186,000 miles per second. So that is the current prevailing theory in science, and the one that you were taught in your high school science classes, the one that's taught to university students in physics, the one that Einstein and Stephen Hawking all agreed with. But one thing that but it is impossible to prove this hypothesis. So the belief is that for all time, light has never been any faster than 186,000 miles per second. But it is impossible for us to go back in time and to measure the speed of light in the past. And all of our measurements are based off of the assumption that light travels at 186,000 miles per second. And so there is no actual evidence that light has always traveled at this speed. We believe so. We think that's the case, and there's a lot of people that believe that are very well-respected scientists. But there is no proof or evidence that proves that light has always been this speed. And one of the issues with science generally is that they like to believe in what's called the steady state theory, and that basically things don't change very much, and if they do change, it's very slowly and over a long time. This is not a well-reasoned theory. This is not supported by evidence or facts or even really any logic. We know that things change very quickly when a volcano erupts. And a volcano erupting can change the geology in the area around it very, very, very quickly. We also know that floods and storms and other natural disasters, earthquakes, asteroid impacts, all sorts of things have very massive impacts on the Earth's climate and on its crust and on a number of different factors that change things very quickly. You know, an asteroid impact is instantaneous. A volcanic eruption, while it may take a fairly long time in human standards, geologically, it is in a blink of an eye. So there is no evidence to suggest that things have always existed the way that they are, and there is no evidence to suggest that that is the truth. And so we're going to listen to Chuck Missler talk about this a little bit more.
From Job, we talked about Job last time, Job 38. Where is the way that light dwelleth? Light's dynamic, darkness is static. These are a remnant of some of the things we pointed out from Job. We went through Job 38 last time. And this, canst thou bind the influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? These two constellations are the only two in the heavens that are gravitationally linked. Other constellations look like a grouping, but...
Yeah, so what he's saying by gravitationally linked is that when you look out into the night sky, it is not a flat plane like a canvas of a painting. It is a three-dimensional, essentially a sphere. And so when you look out at the night sky, the stars that you see in different constellations may be millions and billions of light years apart, and some of them might be farther away than others. They are not all on the same plane. And so when you read Job, it talks about the Pleiades. Let's go back just a second. And canst thou bind the influences of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? And what Chuck Missler is saying is that these two constellations or groups of stars in the night sky are actually next to each other. And there was no way for Job to know this all the way back, thousands and thousands of years ago. There was no way to measure the distance a star was from Job at that time. So how would he know that the influences of the Pleiades would be on each other the way that they are? Those, as far as he knew, those stars, that he didn't even know really what a star was in a sense. And so it's very interesting when we see scientifically accurate statements in the Bible, that we should take those very seriously because it is very hard to explain them. They didn't think scientifically in the way that we do today, and they definitely didn't write that way. And so when we see scientific facts creep in and enter into the text, we should take a second and examine those, as they are very important.
Influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion. These two constellations are the only two in the heavens that are gravitationally linked. Other constellations look like a grouping, but they're really not, because some are close, some are far. But these Pleiades and Orion are, in fact, have a gravitational relationship. And so I don't know how Job knew that, because most astronomers today don't realize that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the signs in God's plan. We would call these signs the zodiac, and the Hebrews would call it the Mazzaroth. So let's take a look at this. Psalm 19 is one of several places that deserves some very special attention here. Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Now, as a teenager, I used to enjoy this psalm, and I took for granted that what it's talking about is the creation. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. And indeed it does, don't misunderstand me. But then it goes on and says some other things. It says, day unto day uttereth speech. Really? You don't mean acoustic speech, certainly. It's empty space. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. What? What words? I almost expect to go out there with a telescope, see if I can find some words spelled out. It's more than just galaxies and nebula and whatever, apparently. Of course, the psalm goes on. I want to talk about signs in the heavens. And in the Hebrew, what we call the zodiac, they would call the Mazzaroth. Now, let me put your mind at ease. We're not getting into astrology, but it's just a matter of history that groups of stars have names. What's interesting that these names are almost the same in all cultures and have been so for thousands, more than 4,000 years. So they're a convenient way of speaking of, if I can mix a metaphor here, geography. If I tell you that there's a star in Andromeda or near Andromeda or whatever, astronomers know where to look. You follow me? They're geographically. There are 12 classical clusters, constellations, that are on the ecliptic. If we take the Earth and extend its equator, you've got a celestial equator. You also have the apparent path of the sun through the sky in a year. That's called the equinoctial color, or more simply, the ecliptic. There are two places where the ecliptic crosses the celestial equator. We call those the equinoxes. That's when the days and nights are of equal length. When it's furthest north or south, that's the solstice, winter, solstice. Now, our days are determined by where the sun is apparently in the path. It's actually where the Earth is, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay, these 12 constellations that are on the ecliptic have names. And we would call them the zodiac, By the way, first let's step back a minute. Do you realize how many stars there are in the universe? There are hundreds and hundreds of billions, so much so that there's no number I could give you that we could even relate to in terms of galaxies and so forth. But here's the mind-blowing part. The next time you run into that, a planetarium show or in a book on astronomy, realize that every one of those stars has a name. You know, when you start thinking about that, that's wow. Psalm 147, verse 4, and in Isaiah 40:26, God calls them each by name. Wow. Let me tell you, I wish we knew more of the names. We know a few of them, and what few we know are absolutely stunning. All the stars have a name. Now, what we call the zodiac, that's from the Greek zodiakos, which comes from a Hebrew root, which comes from Sanskrit, but means sodi. It means the way. Now, most astronomy books assume that it's called the way because that's the way of the sun. It's the path of the sun.
Interestingly enough, that is the name for the early church. It was called the Way.
Having studied this at some length, I'm thoroughly convinced that this term is being used exactly the same way as it is in the book of Acts. It's an allusion to God's plan of redemption. God's plan of redemption.
And in the book of Acts is where we see the church called the Way. So Acts takes place after the events of the Gospels. In some ways, it is a part 2 of the Gospel that explains what happened with the early church. And like I said, the early church was called the Way because they were the way to Christ.
One of the earliest zodiacs we know of is in the Temple of Dendera in Egypt. It's about 2000 BC.
I'm sorry, that was a slight mistake. Jesus is the way to access to the Father.
And it's interesting how when we find other zodiacs, they're all derivative of the same kind of name, same kind of concepts. The Temple of Dendera is in Egypt, and it too has all these colorful types of appendages to the classical signs of the zodiac. Now, what most people don't realize that by the way, the 12 signs of the zodiac are linked to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm going to leave that out for this discussion because we can't possibly even get into all of this, but something you do need to know, we're going to start with Virgo. It starts with Virgo, ends up with Leo. That's the cycle. So how do you know where to start? Because of the Sphinx in Egypt, the head of the woman and the body of the lion. And the word Sphinx means the binding together. But let's get on with this. Virgo the Virgin, we've all heard about that. What you may not realize, for each of the 12 constellations, there are 3 closely associated with it. They're not in the ecliptic, but they're nearby. They're called decans. Now, the decans for the Virgin are Coma the infant. Now, that's weird. Why would a virgin have an infant? Think about it. It means the desired one, incidentally. Centaurus, it's a dart piercing a victim. Booty is the great shepherd and harvester. The next major constellation is Libra, which means the scales. And the three decans for it are the cross, the victim, and the crown. That's kind of interesting. Then you have Scorpio, as we often hear taught, which is serpent's the serpent, no surprise. Orpheus, which wrestles with the serpent. And when he wrestles with the serpent's biting him on one heel, but he's got his foot on its head. Does that ring familiar to you? It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Hercules, the mighty man. Sagittarius has Lyra the eagle holding a lyre, an altar. Draco the dragon, the old serpent. Capricornus has an arrow, an eagle, and a dolphin. And Aquarius has a southern fish, a winged horse, and a swan. Pisces has the band. Andromeda is the woman in chains, and Cephas the crowned king. Aries has Cassiopeia. These are all the decans. The woman enthroned, we all know that's that bent W that's near the pole star. The sea monster who was bound by a lamb, and Perseus, an armed mighty man. And then Taurus has Orion, the glorious prince, Orion's river, and a shepherd. Gemini has the hare, and 2 dogs. The major dog, Sirius, the great dog, and Procyon, the minor one. And Cancer has Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, the lesser and greater sheepfold, and Argo, the ship. And then the last one is Leo, who has the fleeing serpent, the cup of wrath, and the bird of doom. Now, these are all embellished with colorful stories that are very similar in most cultures throughout thousands of years, slightly different here and there. But let me tell you what everybody gets told that's not true. Everybody says, well, these are pictures, and they built stories around the pictures because that's the way they look to them up there.
No.
Well, that's ridiculous. Go out at night sky and look at Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia, it looks like a W. It's just opposite the pole star. And there's no way, it's a W. There's no way it looks like a woman chained to a chair holding an ear of corn.
Not remotely.
Come on. But it's consistent. The story's consistent. The cluster of the stars has nothing to do with the pictures that are associated with them. That's something obvious just by looking at the pictures. What most people don't know, including most astronomers, is where you get the story is by knowing the names of the stars in the order of their brightness. When you know the names of the stars in the order of their brightness, you can put together the story that originally was told about it and the pictures to remind you of the story, not the stars. You with me? It's a mnemonic that you teach kids with. You know, if you're teaching the piano, the spaces are F-A-C-E, right? No, there's no face there, but you use that as a way, you know, F-A-C, whatever. It's a mnemonic, right? We all use mnemonics, right? There are many scholars that believe they were the mnemonics that Adam and Enoch taught their kids, God's plan of redemption. And let's see what we can find out. The first one is Virgo. That's the Virgin, no problem there. Let's turn around a little bit and take a look at it. The primary star, Alpha being the brightest star, is Spica, which means ear of corn. The Hebrew name for this star isn't Spica. That's the one that's handed down through the Babylonian Greek traditions. That's the one the astronomers use. The Hebrew name for that is Semek, which means branch. But here's the interesting thing. There are 20 different Hebrew words translated branch. Only Semek is used exclusively of the Messiah in Jeremiah and Zechariah and twice, and in Isaiah and so forth. Now, something else you should notice.
So what that is saying is that what he's implying there is that the name Semek of the star is directly correlated to the Messiah, Jesus Christ, who came and died for our sins, born of a virgin.
I don't think I earmarked it here with my notes. You notice what she's holding in her left hand. She's got a branch in one hand and an ear of and grain in the other. And the branch and the grain of corn. Remember John? See, the branch is in her right hand, and an ear of corn in her left. From this and a lot of deacons that surround her, she's the promised seed of the woman. She's the virgin that will give birth to the child that will be the Redeemer. The branch, of course, speaks of the Messiah, and the ear of corn, Jesus explains for us in John 12, unless the corn die, it will not bring life and so forth. The next one is Libra, the scales. Well, the Hebrew name for this constellation is Monzanaim, meaning the scales or weighing. And the Arabic name, many of the names, we don't have the Hebrew names, but we do have the Arabs have a very active astronomy because that's the way they navigate on the desert. And so many of these names, we have the Arabic, not the Hebrew for. Al-Zabina, purchase or redemption is what it means. The Coptics call it Lambadia, the station of propitiation. The Latin is where we get the Libra for weighing. The brightest star is Zubin al-Ganubi, which means the price that's deficient. And the next brightest star is Zubin al-Kameli, which means the price that covers. See, someone is short and somebody else covers for us. That begin to sound familiar? Revelation 5, Psalm 49, so on. The third one is Gamma Zubin al-Akrab. That's the price of conflict. And it's pointing towards Centaurus and the victim that's slain. The deacons. The deacons here are the cross. Ooh, that's interesting. The Hebrew Adam cut off. The lupus or victim slain. And the Hebrew name here is Asidah, which means to be slain. The Arabic is Asidatan, which means to be slain. The Egyptian name is interesting. It's Surah for this. It's a lamb. I think that's kind of interesting. And then the crown is the other deacon that's associated with the Libra, the crown that's bestowed. And in the Hebrew name for it is Atara, the royal crown. And we could go on and on with this. I won't. I'll show you one I think is really interesting. And this is the one where the wrestler is wrestling with a serpent, and his one foot is being bitten by the serpent, and the other foot is on Scorpio's head. So I think that's kind of fun. And this all climaxes at the end with Leo, the lion. And the Hebrew name is Arya, the lion. And of course, this lion is associated with the tribe of Judah. It's a tribal standard. It's interesting that the brightest star there is Regulus in this constellation, which is treading underfoot. Deneb is the judge cometh. Deneb Alisad is the judge shall reign. And the deacons associated with him are the fleeing serpent, the cup of wrath, or cup of fire, Corvus the raven. So these are the constellations that we see. And any place you find some writing about this, unless it's been unusually enlightened, it'll carry with it the baggage of the old mythology from Greek and Egypt and what have you. But let's take a look at the message. I'm compressing several hours if I took through all of these to give you the message that this has. We have Virgo, the virgin, which represents the seed of the woman. This is the constellation of the three deacons. Seed of the woman, Coma is the desire of nations, the man of double nature and humiliation, and the exalted shepherd and harvester. All are carried by the constellation of Virgo and the three deacons that are associated with it. Libra is the price to be paid and the cross to be endured, the victim that was slain, and the crown that is purchased. And this gets kind of interesting. Scorpio speaks of the conflict, the serpent's coils, the struggle with the enemy, and the toiling of the vanquisher of evil. Sagittarius speaks of the double-natured one triumphing. He gladdens the heavens, he builds fires of punishment, he casts down the dragon. Capricornus, life out of death, the arrow of God, pierced and failing, springing up again in abundant life. Aquarius, the life waters from on high, drinking in the heavenly food, carrying the good news, bearing aloft the cross over all the earth. You got the Southern Cross in here too. I won't get into that here. Pisces has the multiplication of the Redeemer's people, upheld and governed by the Lamb, intended bride bound and exposed, the bridegroom exalted. Aries has the Lamb found worthy, the bride released and be making ready, Satan bound, and the breaker triumphing. Taurus, the invincible rulers come, the sublime vanquisher, the river of judgment, the all-ruling shepherd. Gemini has the marriage of the Lamb, the enemy trodden down, the prince coming in glory, and his princely following. You get to what we call Cancer, the possession secured. It speaks of two folds, the lesser fold, the church of the firstborn, and the greater fold, Israel, sevenfolding into an everlasting kingdom. And the final one, of course, is Leo the lion, the king rending, the serpent fleeing, the bowl of wrath upon him, his carcass devoured. Now, the classic study on this is by E.W. Bullinger, called the Gospel in the Stars. Also, J.A. Seiss, before the Civil War, wrote a book on this. They're probably the two most reliable ones. I have about 4 or 5 of them. Most of them are echoes of much of the same thing. Plus, the big trick is to try to get some of the missing names of stars identified. And so, on the one hand, this is quite conjectural and very controversial. There are many Bible teachers think that this is way out in left field. And on the other hand, it's my view that there is enough here that seems for real to respect it. There are many things in here that are still, we're filling in blanks that we don't really have enough of the names of some of the stars to justify some of the things it said. But I wanted to show it to you because of because of this whole business, that the stars were put there for signs. And God's greatest achievement is not the creation. The creation is emphasized in Genesis and in Romans 1 and in Job 38 and so forth, and Isaiah 44 and 45, etc. But you can take a half a dozen passages and that's it. God's greatest achievement, his greatest glory, is not the creation, it's the redemption.
Mm-hmm.
See, how do you say that, Chuck? You measure it by 2 things. First of all, how much space in the Bible is devoted to the subject? Well, the creation has a chapter or 2 in Genesis, a chapter and 2 in Job, and a chapter or 2 in Isaiah, and that's largely it. The redemption, whole book of Genesis, Certainly the book of Exodus, where they're redeemed out of Egypt. Certainly Leviticus, the Torah is all about it. And you go through the historical books, is the whole idea of Israel's ultimate redemption. Certainly the prophets. Certainly the Gospels. Certainly the epistles. Revelation is what's the Revelation all about? The climax of God's plan of redemption. There's another way you can measure how important it is. And that is, what did it cost God? What did it cost God to create the universe? 6 days.
His breath.
Breathed out of his nostrils, as the scripture would put it. What did his redemption cost him? It cost him his son.
Yep.
And there are aspects of that that are permanent forever. No, I think that the heavens declare the glory of God. I think the heavens do declare his glory if we do the homework. And tragically, so much of this has been lost through the mythology. It's going to get lost primarily because of what happens in Genesis chapter 11, and we'll touch upon it when we get there. When these ideas, these mnemonics, and the heritage they represent gets corrupted at Babylon. And most of what we know about this in our parlance is the Babylonian translated into the Persian, into the Greek, into the Latin. And garbled, of course, all the way.
Yep. And I will do a teaching in the next few weeks on science in the Bible. I think that there's a very good there's some very good evidence for the Bible that is found with scientific accuracy, historical accuracy, all that kind of stuff. So I'm very thankful for Chuck Missler for providing that teaching. I think that the Mazzaroth is something that we have absolutely forgotten as a society, as we've strayed and moved towards working with demonic forces in the Zodiac. The Zodiac, again, what Satan does is he twists things just a little bit. If you look in the garden, he twisted God's word just a little bit, just enough to get Eve to sin. And so what he did with the Mazzaroth is he twisted it just a little bit, just enough to make it into something that it isn't. And that is a sign of how your life is going to go. What it is it's a story of how Christ is going to redeem the universe. So I praise and thank God for that. So what we are going to do now, I'm going to look up where we are at in our Bible reading, and I will read 2 chapters from Leviticus and 2 chapters I think we're in John. Yep, Leviticus and John. So we'll be doing Leviticus chapter 11. All right, we're going to go therapy. And I closed it. All right, we're going to do Leviticus chapter 11, and then we are going to also read from John chapter 19. Okay. John 19. Wonderful. All right. So we are going to get started right now with Leviticus chapter 11. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, or those that have cloven hooves. The camel, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The rock hyrax, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The hare, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. And the swine, though it divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. These you may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. But all in the seas or in the rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water, or any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. Whatever in the water does not have fins or scales, that shall be an abomination to you. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite, and the falcon after its kind, every raven after its kind, the ostrich, the short-eared owl, the seagull, and the hawk after its kind, the little owl, the fisher owl, and the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw, and the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron after its kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Yet these you may eat of every flying insect that creeps on all fours, those which have jointed legs above their feet, with which to leap on the earth. These you may eat, the locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper after its kind. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. By these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. The carcass of any animal which divides the foot, but is not cloven-hoofed, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean. And whatever goes on its paws, among all kinds of animals that go on all fours, those are unclean to you. Whoever touches any such carcass shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries any such carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It is unclean to you. These also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth, the mole, the mouse, and the large lizard after its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean. Whether it is any item of wood or clothing or skin or sack, whatever item it is in which any work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. Any earthen vessel into which any of them falls you shall break, and whatever is in it shall be unclean. In such a vessel any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. And everything on which a part of any such carcass falls shall be unclean. Whether it is an oven or cooking stove, it shall be broken down, for they are unclean, and shall be unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern in which there is plenty of water shall be clean, but water touches any such carcass becomes unclean. But whatever touches any such carcass becomes unclean. And if a part of any such carcass falls on any planting seed which is to be sown, it remains clean. But if water is put on the seed, and if a part of any such carcass falls on it, it becomes unclean to you. And if any animal which you may eat dies, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. He who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, whatever goes on all fours, or whatever has many feet among all creeping things that creep on the earth, these you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. For I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For I am the Lord who brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animals, and the birds, and every living creature that moves in the waters, and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten, and the animal that may not be eaten. Leviticus chapter 12. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a woman has conceived and borne a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. As in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. She shall not touch any hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her customary impurity, and she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. When the days of her purification are fulfilled, whether for a son or a daughter, she shall bring to the priest a lamb of the first year as a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering, to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her, and she shall be clean from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who has borne a male or a female. And if she is not able to bring a lamb, then she may bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one as a burnt offering and the other as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. John 19. So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him." Then Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the praetorium, and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you, and power to release you?" Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me, unless it had been given you from above. Therefore the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin." From then on Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold, your king." But they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he delivered him to them to be crucified. Then they took Jesus and led him away. And he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the Place of a Skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him, and 2 others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Then many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Therefore the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews." But he said, "I am the King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was without seam, woven from the top in one piece. They said therefore among themselves, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be," that the scripture might be fulfilled which says, "They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." Therefore the soldiers did these things. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother, and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother, and the disciple whom he loved, standing by, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour that disciple took her to his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now a vessel full of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and put it to his mouth. So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, It is finished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. Therefore, because it was the day of preparation, that the bodies should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath. Therefore, because it was the preparation day, that the bodies should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken, and that they might be taken away. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true. And he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you may believe. For these things were done that the scripture should be fulfilled. Not one of his bones shall be broken. And again, another scripture says, They shall look on him whom they pierced. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took the body of Jesus. And Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Jesus, and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby. Chapter 20. Now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene was sent to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter, and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. Peter therefore went out, and the other disciple, and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter, and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen cloths lying there. Yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. And he saw the linen clothes lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who came to the tomb first, went in also, and he saw and believed, for as yet they did not know the scripture, that he must rise again from the dead. Then the disciples went away again to their own homes. But Mary stood outside by the tomb weeping, and as she wept she stooped down and looked into the tomb. And she saw 2 angels in white sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Then they said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? She said to them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. Now when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him, Rabboni, which is to say, Teacher. Jesus said to her, Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brethren, and say to them, I am ascending to my Father, and your Father, and to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came, and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord, and that he had spoken these things to her. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled, for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in the midst and said to them, Peace be with you. When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. So Jesus said to them again, Peace to you. As the Father has sent me, I also send you. And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. The other disciples therefore said to him, We have seen the Lord. So he said to them, Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. And after 8 days his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace to you. Then he said to Thomas, Reach your finger here, and look at my hands, and reach your hand here, and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas answered and said to him, My Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed. And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Amen. Praise God for the work that he has done and for giving us his holy scriptures. I'm thankful that I could read them to you tonight. I thank you for following along with me throughout this whole video. It's been a lot of fun, and I am excited to get back at it in the next few days. Thank you guys. Have a great week. Goodbye.